I'm Jason.
I'm Elisha, and this is our story.
Our lives as kids, we were not raised to know God. We did not know anything really about God. We were baptized as children and told that, if we just did good things in our lives and everything would turn out fine and we'd go to heaven and God accepts everyone. So we lived our lives like that. We were out of control. We did things we wanted. Things that didn't really make sense, but we figured whatever, there really wasn't too much for consequences, and so we just lived a life of just doing whatever we pleased and whatever we wanted, and really a selfish thing. Very shortly after graduation, I went on a crime spree and got in a lot of trouble and got arrested, and while I was in jail, I didn't really reflect on things that were what I should be reflecting on, like why am I here? I was more blaming people why I was in there. And short part of that would be after I was in there for several months, I decided I wanted to leave, so I attempted an escape in jail, and then, which I was successful at. And as I got out, I got arrested again for that and didn't really think through the consequences of what would happen. And I ended up being charged with multiple charges, and was facing up to 50 to 60 years in prison with somewhere around a 40-year mandatory. And after I'd been locked up for about 4 years, I had never been taken to court. I'd never been taken to court for the escape charges, and after about 4.5 years, I got a letter in the mail explaining that my charges had all been dismissed, and there really wasn't an explanation for it. And at the time, I just took it as, hey, great, that's a miracle. And I didn't really give it credit to anything. I just, part of life kind of thing. And so I was finally released from prison and got out, and was doing basically the same attitude where I just kind of floated through things. I was just trying to do better, and I didn't want to go back to jail, but it was still chaotic. And shortly after I got out, I met Elisha, and we didn't really understand each other too well, and we didn't care to understand each other. We just kind of did our own thing and went around and pretty much doing whatever we could to hurt each other from almost the start. And so this went on for quite a few years, and then we had we ended up getting pregnant with our first child. And after Jem was born, we tried to do better. And then right before Jayden was born, I was arrested for another OWI, which would have been my third one. So when I was locked up for that, that was obviously really traumatizing toward my wife and then our first kid. And then right before I ended up going to jail, we found out that we were pregnant with our second child, and that was pretty crushing, considering that I knew I was going to probably be still in jail or in the halfway house, and there was probably a good chance that I was going to miss my second child's birth. So that was pretty rough. And so when I finally did get out of there, it was very obvious that our relationship was pretty much damaged to the point of never coming back. I mean, there was no communication. It was bad. And during that time, I had started a job in the halfway house, and I was living in Fort Dodge, and she was living with my parents. And I started a job for a company that was based out of Mason City, and it was just a regular construction job, and I kind of enjoyed it. It was pretty, the people I worked with were pretty decent. And I worked with them all the way through the halfway house, and then when I got out of the halfway house, they asked me to move up to Mason City so I could continue the job that I'd been doing there. And then have my family and everybody move up. And by now our second child is born and doing well. So we went up to Mason City and I started working there. And while I was there, there was a guy named James who was working with me on the crew who we did not get along. We were kind of clashing together. We had really similar backgrounds, and but we just could not get along. And so for about 6 months of working at this job, it was pretty sketchy to say the least. It was me and him that were constantly battling between each other. He didn't really like anything about me, and I didn't like anything about him. James is a very outspoken person, and James has a hard time taking no for an answer from people. But he's very open with the way he talks. And so he came to me at work after he got saved and started going to church. And his demeanor toward me had changed a lot. I still did not like him, but he started to try to mend a relationship with me as far as friendship. And so eventually, when I got through not looking at him with just hateful thoughts in my head, I started kind of seeing James as a friend because we had so much in common. And but the problem was James kept telling me to go to church with him, and I didn't want anything to do with that. For a majority of my life, I had basically lived as an atheist. I was kind of in the balance of the two. I was either an atheist or I hated God. It was kind of just dependent on the day. And I knew every argument there was to combat anybody that talked about Christianity. If somebody told me about who God was, I had an answer of who he really was or who he really wasn't. And I was real good at arguing against God. And so me and James were obviously clashing in this conversation between who was right and who was wrong and salvation and everything. But he was persistent enough to where I just got agitated enough to where I just finally gave in and said, fine, I'll come to church with you one day. And if I go, then you can't ask me again unless I want to go. And so he agreed. I went, and when I got there, I was expecting a lot of things. And I was really sitting in church and I was ready to analyze everything and combat everything and be able to tell him how things were so wrong and how everything was so fake and things like that. But when the pastor started preaching, the story that he was telling and the way he was telling it was not what I was expecting. It wasn't what I knew of what God was. I had been taught that you're baptized and then you do good and you go to heaven. There was nothing else. There wasn't, everything that I knew was based on what you did in life. It was not based on what Christ did for you in your life. And so I had questions, but I still did not want to go back with James because I didn't like church. It was boring. Didn't want to go. Didn't care. I could feel something pulling me, but I also felt a massive amount of resistance because of all the stuff in my life that I was trying to explain. So I fought it for a long time. I fought it hard. And in the meantime, as I'm fighting God and where he's trying to pull me, everything else around me is just crashing. Everything is crashing. There's just, can't think of a thing in that time of that period where anything was going well. I just felt this drawing to something else, to somewhere else. And so then James and Pastor Scott had brought me I actually went to church on my own. I came back to the church and I asked Pastor Scott if we could sit down and talk, and James was with me. And we sat down for probably 3-4 hours and talked about everything and anything. And they were explaining to me, just what Christ has done for us as just in humanity in general. And a lot of the stuff they're saying was making a lot of sense at this point. And but I just really didn't want to give in. I didn't know where to go, but I didn't really want to listen. So then one morning me and Elisha had gotten into a rather large argument the night before, and I had a couple side jobs to do. One of them was a couple hours away, or about an hour away. And so I decided to go there in the morning just to get away. And as on the way there, I'm listening to the radio, and this is kind of out in the middle of nowhere, so there's not a lot of stations and stuff. So as I'm going through the stations trying to find another one, AFR came on, and it was a Saturday morning, so it was like a Saturday morning cartoon show. But this morning, they had this show of a family, and the family it just started out just a regular family. They were living life, doing whatever. And then it started going into where things started going wrong and bad. And it got to the point where this story with this family had basically taken a turn to where it was almost exactly the same thing that I was going through in my life. And so this story had me really drawn in. It was almost as if it was speaking directly to me and explaining directly to me my really, really bad life. But at the end of the story, come to find out that the husband had got saved, and then in the meantime, he changed his whole life. His wife left him but came back because of his change in his life, and then after that she was saved, and then all their kids were saved and all this other stuff. So the whole story leading up to it was this massive disaster where there was almost the exact same thing in my life that had happened. And so that was pretty much that was a moment where things broke completely for me, and I just I kind of just put my head down, and I just for a few minutes and thought about it, and then I just looked up and I said, okay, God, I'm hearing what you're saying. I'm understanding what you're saying. And that was finally the day that I finally broke down all my barriers and broke down all my prideful thoughts and my stubbornness and stuff like that. And I just went over straight to the church from there. I dropped everything I was doing, and I went past Scott and I said, okay, now I need to have a conversation with you, and this is the serious stuff. I don't want to ask any more questions. The only question I need to know is, what do I got to do to be saved? And then the next question is what to do afterwards. And so we sat down, and for the rest of the day, for about 8 hours, we sat down and he explained it to me, and I'm trying to find a way in my head to say no, but I could not think of anything. And Pastor God just looked at me and said, it's just a decision. Are you going to accept Christ or you're not? And if you're not, then what's the reason? And I was like, I have no idea. And he just said, well, that's your decision to make. So, yeah. So anyways, we left that church that night, and I was a saved man.
So while that's all going on with him, I'm still going out and hanging out with my friends at the bars, and totally being a pain in his butt because he wants to change his life, and I'm not wanting to do that. And he did invite the kids and I to church, and we went a couple of times, and just kind of was like, okay, that's it. And kind of like how we did when we were kids, we just went and had the study, and then went on with our lives. And I was in a transition of employment, and the last day of my job, I went out and celebrated and with my coworkers, and one of the customers that was coming in on a regular basis, we had started just being more friendly to each other. And that night I had gone home with him, and that was something it's not like it was planned, but it was something that when I woke up the next morning, it was like, yep, this is something definitely that Jason's going to leave me for. Our marriage is done, it's over. I didn't want it to be, but at the same time, I knew that my decision to do that was directly against him, and something that he was never going to forgive me for. So we had started going to church, like I said, and met with Pastor Scott's wife for coffee one time, and she was talking to me about God and church and just asking questions, and the adultery never came up. It was something that was very hidden and never expressed with her, but she was telling me one thing that I remember with her is just she was holding out her hand and telling me that once God will hold on to you and he will never let you go. And that sticks with me, and I needed that security in my life. And I was bawling the entire time we were having coffee, and I don't know, just started attending church with him and seeing a change in him. And we were listening to one of the pastors, and he was saying about stepping over that faith line, and when have you ever had a time in your life that you put Jesus first and that you made Jesus Lord of your life? And I remember sitting there thinking, I know who Christ is. I know that he died for me, or he died on the cross, but I didn't ever make it personal. Never made a decision to follow him and make him Lord. And I was struck by that because we had never been taught that before. And then we had an argument one night, and we just let it go and went to bed and went our own ways. And I woke up in the middle of the night, which is very random for me. I'm a pretty hard sleeper, and I couldn't go back to sleep, and I'm wrestling and going back and forth and just thinking of things that's been happening, and what am I doing with my life? And I went out and the TV, turned it on to zone out those thoughts, and just so that I could rest. And I couldn't rest because I needed to ask God to forgive me, because I had of the decisions that I was making, they weren't good for my family, they weren't good for me, and they were directly against him. And I asked God to forgive me and asked him to lead me and to direct my life and show me the way he wanted me to go. So that night he changed my heart. I had to confront to my husband about what I did, and he's forgiven me. We went through a lot of counseling with the Pastor Scott and his wife. They're very dear to us. We have 3 beautiful boys, and he's just changed our lives to focus on him and not ourselves. And Jason wouldn't be here right now without the grace of God. There's a reason why he was let out at 4.5 years, so he could meet me and that he could meet God.
So yeah, and in so many ways God has helped us and saved us, not only just in eternity salvation, but he saved our marriage by far, because there's no way without God I could have ever overcome something like that. It was hard to do, but with God, nothing's impossible. That was one thing in my life that would have been impossible for either of us had I not been saved. And the only reason that happened was because of God. And he saved our marriage. He saved our lives. The way we were running our lives together, who knows where we would have ended up, and probably at any time. He's also saved our children. Both of our 2 sons, our oldest 2, are both saved, and Professor Faith have been baptized.
And we got baptized together. He waited for me.
Yeah, I did. So, yeah, I wanted to get baptized but I wanted to be patient and let God work in my wife before I went and did it myself. I was hoping that God would bless me enough to awaken Elisha in salvation so we could do it together, and sure enough, it wasn't too much longer after I got saved that Elisha got saved, and we both got baptized together. And yeah, that was an amazing day. I mean, it really was in our lives together, because just watching how our lives have progressed ever since then with God in our lives compared to before, and just the knowledge, just knowing that the only reason that wasn't because of us. And obviously ever since then, and all the stuff that we've gone through, it has really humbled us in our lives to understand that we really don't have control over anything we're doing. It's all God. And the more you fight, the more it's going to, it'll fall. So you just have to let God work through you and understand that we're basically powerless in our lives. If He really wants us to be, He can make us do whatever, really, the hard way or the easy way. So, yeah, it's been just over 10 years now we've been saved, and we've been getting stronger as we've gone throughout our lives. And there's no one else we could possibly thank but God. There's no way we would have ever projected our lives to be where it is right now if it wasn't for the saving power of Christ and just the love of God for us and for His people and for humanity. I mean, it's just been an awesome ride. That God is just unbelievable in everything that He does.
Amen.